So, hey everyone, welcome to Dear Soul. This is a space where we can have real conversations about faith, healing, and walking through the hardest seasons of your life. And today's episode is so special because we're diving into a conversation that I know so many of us can relate to, the journey of waiting. And I can't think of a better guest to help us explore this than the incredible Sonhara Eastman. She is a playwright and screenwriter. You may also know her from her highly talked about web series Black Girl's Guide to Fertility on YouTube. So, Sonhara, welcome to Dear Soul. I'm so
Thank
excited to
you.
have you here.
Thank
And
you.
can you just kind of tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. As you mentioned, I am a screenwriter, playwright. I dealt with infertility for over 7 years. So before I had my daughter, I did multiple IUIs, probably like 8 or 9 IUIs. It was extremely isolating because I didn't feel like there was an outlet necessarily in the African American community. And I did have other outlets through other races, but I just didn't have that connection with in my own community. It was a silence about infertility that you couldn't talk about it. And so that was very disheartening. And I felt extremely, extremely alone. So during that time, I started my podcast where I just kind of like outed myself and I talked about infertility and the fact that, I felt alone in this process. From there, I kind of started meeting other people who were dealing with the same issue, people who look like me. And it just opened up an outlet and gave me a community of people who look like me, who were going through the same battles, trying to become a parent. And so after the multiple failed IUIs, we had 2 failed IVFs. All the stuff is extremely costly. And then my third IVF, which at that point I had given up, and we can get into the spiritual aspect of that later, but I had literally given up. That's when I got pregnant with my daughter. And then I had her in 2019. And then I got pregnant with my son 2022, had him in September 2023. So he's 1 year old now. So yeah, a lot of battles, a lot of struggle, but I persevered. I did not give up, and now I have 2 children. I just got back from my daughter's gymnastics class, so I have on my sweatshirt. Okay. I have on my sweatshirt and sweatpants, and they keep barging in here. So sorry about that.
No, no problem at all. I love that. I definitely your story and your journey is so inspiring. So, I mean, my husband and I we're actually in that journey. So we've been
Okay.
trying for a couple of years to have
Yeah.
children, and it hasn't happened for us yet. So I
Mhm.
always love to see someone where it has happened.
Yeah.
That's so inspiring to see.
Yeah.
And I really just want to know, like, what's one part of your journey that we don't see? So we see, we see the children barging
Mhm.
in, but what
Mhm.
everything before that, what's something that we didn't see?
The tears, the loneliness, the isolation, not having anyone to talk to, the giving up aspect. So, like when I said I gave up, and even let me backtrack. So, my parents are ministers, and so of course they had prayed for me. They were praying for me and standing and believing, that this was going to happen for me, and keeping me encouraged. But throughout that process, throughout those 7 years, whenever I went to church, like no one was talking about infertility. No one, not one pastor. No one touched on it. No one said anything about infertility. So every Sunday, I felt like when I went to church, I just came back empty because I felt like no one was addressing the issue that I was having. And at the time, I was traveling back between New York and California because I was working out there at the time. And my mom had met a pastor out there, and she was like, you should go see this person because they probably can help you. And so, Sterling, I'm on the call. Go tell dad. Go tell dad. Thank you. And so I did. I went out to this church, and the pastor prayed for me. Like when I was sitting in the congregation, he called me out and he prayed for me, and he said, "Do you have children?" And I said, "No." And he said, you're going to have children. And he said, by this time next year, you're going to conceive. And at that point, I just had so much rejection from trying to conceive that I did not believe it. So even when he told me that, and God finally answered my prayer with a pastor addressing my issue, I still did not believe it. And literally less than a year from that time, I conceived my daughter. And then when I went back to that same pastor after I had my daughter, he said, "You're gonna have a son." And when we went to try for my son, me and my husband both like, we didn't want to go through the year-long struggle of trying. If it didn't work on this shot, we were just going to be content with having our daughter. And so we did the one IVF with him, and the first shot it worked with him, and he came in 2023. But just throughout that process that no one saw, I felt throughout the faith aspect that God was reassuring me this was going to happen. Although my faith was kind of dying, I didn't feel that there were churches who were specifically speaking to the infertility aspect. So that made it more isolating for me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes complete sense to me, just kind of being in that journey. So my husband, his father was my pastor. So,
Okay.
he's a PK. So
Yeah.
whole family is ministers. So I definitely get the aspect
Mhm.
of getting the prophecies, you're going to
Yeah.
conceive, you're going to conceive. And
Yeah.
you start off with the strong faith,
Mm.
you're like, okay, yes, I believe this. But after
Mhm.
so many failed attempts, it really takes a hit at your faith. And I know for
Yeah.
me, especially, I had a moment where I found myself crying out. I'm like, God, what is
Mhm.
it? Is it something
Mhm.
I'm doing? Like,
Exactly.
what's the issue? So have
Mhm.
you ever had that moment where you kind of felt like you hit rock bottom? And
Yeah.
when you were in that space, what did
Mhm.
God do?
I felt like I was saying to God, like, did I do something wrong? Like, what did I do, specifically for this to happen to me? Like, how come I'm not conceiving? Why don't I have children? And so throughout that process, like, he reminded me. So my grandmother had passed like shortly after I got married, and one of the things he reminded me of was her testimony. And like it came to my mind because at that time I really, really was missing her. And she would always give a testimony every Sunday at church when I was a kid, without fail. Anytime testimony time came up, she would stand up and she would get happy and all that stuff. And she would say, the doctor told me I could never have kids, but I got 5 daughters. So the church would get happy. She would clap and everybody get happy. And so after she passed, her testimony just kept replaying in my mind. And so I was like, oh, like, wait a second. Although this wasn't necessarily back then classified as infertility, like she wasn't able to have children. Like she didn't have her first kid. I think she was like 34 years old, which back then is old for conception. And so I'm like, wow. So at 34, she had her first kid and she had 5 kids after that. So that was kind of my roadmap the guy gave me, like, I did it for your grandmother. Like, what makes you think I can't do it for you? So I just kept her testimony in my head. I wrote out her testimony, and then I wrote out the prophecies that I had received throughout the years. Because even before I went to California, other people prophesied to me that I was going to have children. But one of the things that connected the most to me is when I went to California, and the pastor's name is Prophet Ruckins, New Breed Worship Center. So I'm still a part of their church. And one of the things he said to me is like, you came to the right place. Like, I have an anointing in this area. I have an anointing for people who want to conceive but have not been able to conceive. And he told no lies. Like, he definitely, other people prayed for me, other people prophesied, but he had the specific anointing to move things forward. Because within a couple months, although my faith literally had dwindled, I didn't believe particularly what he said, because I felt like I had been let down before with people telling me I was going to conceive, you're going to have a child. And when you get a prophecy, it doesn't necessarily mean it's instantaneous, like it's going to happen
Right.
that day. There is no particular time stamp to it. It's just saying they can see your future. They know that you're going to have a child. But if you're wanting something, you want that prophecy to come into the right now. So as soon as you hear it, you're like, okay, well, this is going to happen. Maybe it'll happen next month. Maybe it'll happen 2 months. But as the first year goes by, second year, third year, fourth year, fifth year, sixth year, seventh year, you're like, wait a second. Did they get this wrong? Did somebody miss the mark? Am I being told these things just to be let down? And so it was a pivotal moment for me, but I was at the right place at the right time with the right people who were anointed in that area to help push me forward to conception.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the key thing, being with the right people at the right time.
Mhm.
And I know for me, like a large part of my journey, as far as like, I feel like I suffered in silence. Like there was almost a level of shame to it because
Mhm.
my mom, she has 7 children.
Mhm.
All of my, I have, I can't even think of, I think 20 plus nieces and nephews.
Yeah.
My nieces and nephews have children, so I have a huge family. So it
Mhm.
just seemed like everybody was like fertile
Having children.
except for
Yeah.
me. And
Mhm.
it was just like a almost a level of shame to that, you
Mhm.
know? And so I
Mhm.
kind of internalized it and just kind of suffered in silence. And
Mhm.
why do you think that so
Mhm.
many of us just choose to
Mhm.
suffer in silence rather
Yeah.
than talking about it?
I think specifically as it relates to Black people, like you just said, like everyone you know has children, or
Yeah.
not just a child, but multiple children. So anytime I went to a family event or I showed up to a birthday party, it's like, well, why don't you have kids? Like, what are you waiting for? What's taking so long? And then
Mhm.
you're just kind of like, well, I'm focused on my career. Or I'm busy. Like you never want to say what the specific issue is because, as far as you know, no one in the room is having that issue. You know, this person has 4 kids, this person has 3 kids, this person has 2 kids. No one at the table has had that issue as far as you know. But after I came out with my podcast and then my web series, I did have a couple people in my family, men and women, reach out to me who said that they struggled with infertility. Some people who never had children. And so you wondered, even when you see people who are older, okay, well, they don't have children, you feel like, okay, well, that probably was a personal choice. You know, they were focused on their career, or maybe some people don't want kids. But then you realize, like, when they're reaching out to you, well, you know, you're so brave for talking about that because I went through this and I was not able to have kids. You know, I didn't know these resources were open to me. I didn't know because I didn't have anyone to talk to like you. And so I just didn't move forward with having kids because when it didn't happen, like I didn't go to a fertility specialist, like I didn't go to another doctor. I just figured, okay, well, this is not meant for me. And there was just so much sadness in that for me because I'm a big advocate for myself. Like, and my husband will tell you if I have a pimple on my face, like I will go to I go to the doctor literally for anything. And so when it came down to infertility, it was no different. I was like, okay, well, it's been a year. Like something is not right. Like, you know, we should definitely have had a child by now. So I was on it. Like I was going to every doctor. I was calling everyone. I was doing the holistic things. I was doing everything. But again, when you don't have people in your family who are talking about that, or you're not surrounded around friends who are going through that, because even out of college, most of my friends were getting married and having children. So some of their kids are literally graduating, you know, or going to junior high school or graduating high school now. And so, like, you know, I'm just starting out with my family. And so it's a whole nother aspect. It's like, well, you don't have kids yet, you know, so you don't want to say anything to them because it's like you feel like, you know, like you said, ashamed. You feel ashamed to share your story, or ashamed to say, well, yeah, we've been trying, but it hasn't worked because you feel like you're broken if you say that, if you vocalize that. So when you don't have people who look like you or people in your family or friends who are going through that, who share that with you, you just kind of keep it to yourself because you feel like you don't have an outlet.
Yeah, for sure. And like I know for me, it took me a couple of years like to even talk to my husband about how I was feeling.
Hmm.
I always felt like I had to be strong because I didn't
Hmm.
want it to appear like, I really wanted this. Because sometimes you try to act like your hopes are not up and you're not
Exactly.
looking at your calendar and checking
Hmm.
your cycle and okay, well I'm this many days late and I'm
Exactly.
Googling pregnancy symptoms and like
Yeah.
I'm doing all the
All the
things
things.
behind
Yeah.
closed doors, but to
Exactly.
him, I'm just, nonchalant. I'm like, "Oh, I'm
Yeah.
okay. If it happens, it happens." Did
Exactly.
you ever feel like you had to be strong? And, like, how did you kinda navigate that? Did you feel isolated or
I did it. Well, first of all, I felt like I had to lie and
Yeah.
say, you know, "Well, I'm not having an issue," or not even that I'm not having an issue, more so like, you know, I'm focused on this or I'm focused on that. Everything but the truth, you know, everything but, oh, we're trying, but it's not working. And going back to my grandmother, so when she had passed, my sister was pregnant at the time and she was close to having her son. And so she couldn't fly. So my husband was like, well, we can all just drive. So that way she can go. And so I'm like, drive, because we live in Georgia. My family's from New York, but we drove. We drove out there. So on the car ride going there, I got sick because I was on all these hormones and they told me I had PCOS, which is why I was not conceiving. And so I was on metformin, like all the, like I was sick as a dog in that car. Like I was so sick. And so we had to keep stopping. So my husband was like, I'm going to tell them, what's going on. Both my sisters in the car. And then we got to New York. We had some family at my parents' house. And I was like, no, like, do not tell anyone. But he told them. And I was so mad at him that he told them. But after that, it was kind of like a wall, had broken because they were like, oh, we didn't know that you were going through that. Oh, well, that makes sense now. It makes sense why you weren't feeling well. It makes sense why you didn't show up to this party. It makes sense why you didn't come here. And so I felt like once he did share it, although I didn't want him to, once he did share it, it helped me put my guard down a little bit. Like, obviously I wasn't judged. They just, were like hugging on me and was like, it's gonna be all right. Da, 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 da. But I felt like just sharing it with them gave me more support. And it kind of it shattered my fears of, them thinking, I don't know what I was thinking. They would think less about me, or I would have like this stigma on my back or above my head about not being able to conceive. But once he told them, it was a weight off of my back because I felt like I definitely had support from my immediate family. Like my parents knew, but that was it. Like my siblings did not know. And I'm very close to my family. I talk to my sisters literally like 10 times a day. I talk to my brother literally all the time. But they were not in the know. Cause I'm like, no, I'm not. My brother has a bunch of kids. Like, my sister, has kids. And so I'm like, everyone has kids, like how do I even present this conversation to them? But I
Yeah.
felt like once he told them that it was for the better because I had their support. And my sister started coming with me to my appointments, and she even came when I did my embryo transfer for my daughter, who is now here. So it definitely gave me a support system.
Yeah, and I think that's so important. And I'm kind of like, the same boat. Like, honestly, my book
Mhm.
and this podcast series is
Yeah.
really my first time talking about it. So I still like my sister. I talk to my sister about it all the time.
Okay.
So she kind of knows the struggles. But as far as like my brothers and
Yeah.
even my mom and my nieces and
Yeah.
nephews and other family, I don't really talk about it. I
Mhm.
hadn't talked about it. But what
Yeah.
I've learned is just from writing the book alone,
Mhm.
it was like a release for me
Yeah. Mhm.
because I'm like, now I can finally just put a name to how I've been feeling for all these years. And
Exactly.
then coming across your story, like it's
Mhm.
so refreshing to
Mhm.
talk to someone who has been through it and
Yeah.
who is now on the other side of it.
Yeah.
I just think that's so like such a refreshing thing. It
Mhm.
really allows you to heal. Um,
Mhm.
and of course, my faith in God, like
Yeah.
that has been such a huge piece. And I really want to dive into that portion
Mhm.
with
Mhm.
you. How has your faith really played a part in your journey, in your infertility journey, and just your
Yeah.
journey in this
But
navigating this?
that was a big part, and I think it also was a part of my frustration as well, like, "Well, God, you told me this, God,
Right.
you showed me this," and I'm a dreamer, so I dream things as well, so, "God, you showed me this. God, you told me this." Like, I've seen these kids, and my mom is a dreamer as well, so I wanna say this was, like, around the 3rd or 4th year of me trying, and, I had a dream about these 2 kids, like, it was 2 kids, and they were sitting next to me, and I was like thinking in a dream, like, whose kids are these? And my grandfather, he's deceased. He had showed up in a dream, and like we were all sitting there talking. And then I woke up. I didn't say anything about the dream. The very next day, my mom had literally an identical dream, except for the kids were at her house, and the kids were getting on the bus, the number 2 bus, which is the number of agreement. And so I just happened to mention to her, and I said, I had this dream, and she's like, I had the same dream. And so I was like, okay, so I wrote that down. Okay, well, she had this dream and I had this dream. Okay, well, so God is working it out. I have
Right.
these prophecies. Okay, you're gonna have a child. You're gonna have a child from your own womb. You're gonna bear a child. I wrote out those prophecies. And so having those things helped me, but it also, I feel like it was hurting me because I'm like, well, God, if you said it, how come it's not manifesting? How come I haven't seen it yet? Did you forget about me? Did you change your mind? Like, did I do something? So it was this, I would say, mental anguish that I was constantly going through in my mind. Like, well, God, why would you say these things and they have not manifested yet? Why, how come it's been so much time and you said these things and they're not happening? Like, your word does not fall. So what is the problem? Like, did I do something? And these things were just constantly going through my mind. And so it wasn't until I went to California in the church I talked about, New Breed Worship Center, with Prophet Ruckins, McKinley, and he just like, when he prayed for me, like a lot of those things broke off. Again, I still didn't particularly believe that I was going to conceive, but I felt a weight lifted off of me after he prayed for me. And he also was preaching about Hannah that Sunday I went. And that was something that I had also not experienced. No pastor had preached or talked about infertility through my 7-year journey of trying to conceive. And that night he was preaching about Hannah. And so that was something else that caught my attention. I was like, oh wow, like he's God, you answered that prayer. Because that was one of my frustrations with God. Like, no one's preaching about my situation. Why is that? Why is this happening? And I went there and he was preaching about this situation. And so my faith definitely dwindled. But like I said, I had these words, I had these prophecies, and I would speak over them every day. And I also would pray, like other women that I met who were dealing with infertility, I would also pray for them as well. And then the weird thing is, like, some of them, like on Instagram, would say that they're pregnant, and I'll be happy, but then I'll also be sad. Like, wait a second, like you answered their
Right.
prayer, you're trying for like 2 years. Like, what about me? Like,
Right. You skipped
so
over me. Hold on.
yeah, like just being transparent. Like I would kind of be sad about it, like happy for them, but then sad, like, oh my God, wait a second. Like, so prayers are working, but how come mine didn't manifest yet?
Right.
And so, yeah, having those prophecies helped, but it also was a level of frustration that came with that for me because it wasn't happening in the time that I thought it should happen or the time I was expecting it to happen. But when it did happen, literally, like, and I talked about this on my podcast one time, I did everything wrong. Like I was supposed to, like when you go through the IVF, you have to give yourself hormone shots at a certain time. And because I was coming from the East Coast to the West Coast, my mind was still on East Coast time. And so it was like maybe like a week or so later, I realized, oh my God, I'm giving myself the shots at the wrong time. And so even when they told me to go to take the pregnancy test at we found a fertility clinic in California that I could go to do my pregnancy test, which is, they do it by your blood work just to make sure it's accurate. I'm like, there's no way. I didn't even want to go do that test. I'm like, there's no way that it worked because I did everything wrong. I was lifting stuff. I was throwing my suitcase on a plane, like just all kind of things I was not supposed to be doing because I did not believe that it necessarily was going to happen. And that's the time that I conceived. So even when they called me, they told me my pregnancy test was positive. I said, you must have my stuff mixed up with someone else because at that fertility clinic, it was in Pasadena, it was packed. When I say packed, there had to be at least 50 people in there lining up, standing up, like everywhere. Like I've never seen anything like that in my life. So I'm like, they must have my test mixed up with someone else. And I said, no, you got it wrong. And the nurse called back and she was like, okay, this is a real thing. I need you to go back to that same clinic because that was a Friday. I need you to go back on Monday and I need you to retest. Okay. I need you to get it together and go retest. I'm still like, okay, whatever. Monday, I go back. Monday afternoon, she calls me and was like, Sonhara. And I'm like, yes. And she was like, your test is positive. You need to come back to Atlanta. We need to come. You need to come to the office and see us. And I'm like, there's no way. Because even then, like, I'm just like, I don't feel anything. There's nothing. My husband was like, okay, we're going to go to CVS. He's like, they're not lying. I was like, I'm not saying they're lying. They clearly have my test mixed up with someone else. Went down to CVS, got some pregnancy tests because I would never do at-home tests either because even before infertility, even before the fertility clinics, I did so many at-home pregnancy tests that were negative that was just my thing. Like, I'm not going to do an at-home
Yeah.
test. I don't want to deal with that disappointment. So we went to CVS, got some pregnancy tests, and I was like, I'm not going to look at this, just wasting my time. And he was like, give it to me. So he came back and he was like, look. And I was like, what? I was like, are you serious? I'm like, there's no way. And a couple of days after that, I got sick. I was really sick as a dog. And I was sick. Like, some people have morning sickness. I had all day sickness with both of my pregnancies. So I'm like, oh, this is real. Like, this is a real thing. So I'm saying that to say that even when you don't have the faith, even when your faith has dwindled, God can still move because I'm not tell you, I didn't have the faith anymore. I had given up. After year 7, I'm like, "I'm done." Like, and I in my mind, I'm like, "If this doesn't work with this 3rd IVF," I was like, "I'm done." I was already done in my mind because I didn't think it was gonna work. But I was like, "I'm done. I'm not coming back. I'm not doing any more hormones. I'm not doing any more tests." And that was the time that it worked.
Wow. And that's what I was gonna ask you, and that's so encouraging to me because that's kind of like I don't take the home pregnancy test anymore.
Yeah.
And that it's so like when you're in that storm,
Mhm.
like it's almost like you can't think straight. So you try to not think about it. So
Mhm.
you try to, put your mind on other things, put your mind on work,
Exactly.
but you have to have an anchor in the storm. So I was gonna
Exactly.
ask you, and you kind of touched on it a little bit, but were there
Mhm.
any scriptures, any songs, any
Mhm.
affirmations, anything that kind of became
Mhm.
your anchor while you were in your waiting season?
So I had a prayer confession that I wrote out, just something I kind of made up for myself, just already thanking God, ironically, that it was done, although my faith dwindled. And something else I put on there was that I would continue, like, even God, when you bless me with children, I would continue to help other women who were in this storm because I know what that feels like. So that was my prayer confession every day that I would read out loud, like thanking Him in advance for these 2 children that that I'd seen in my dream. And I was specific about the 2 because that's what I saw. And then I also said that I would continue to help other women. Like once you bless me, I would continue to help other women who were in that struggle. That was my confession every day. I literally, First Samuel, like I read about Hannah, literally every day. I meditated on that scripture, and just continuously, I would just write down. I had a journal, and I would write down like every day or every other day, my confession of faith, and that I believed that God was going to do it for me. Even in my mind, that my faith was dwindling. Like I didn't necessarily believe after the years kept going on that it necessarily was going to happen, but that was just part of my routine, just literally writing it down and continuously writing down the prophecies that I received throughout the years. I would put those on index cards. And something about writing them out, which has helped me to just stay focused and, not particularly, I don't want to say not give up because I did give up, but just to feel like, okay, I'm doing my faith confessions. I am doing something, I'm being vocal, I'm saying something, to move these things into the atmosphere. So those are some things I did every day. My prayer confession, continuously writing out the prophecies I received, whether it's in my notebook, literally just rewriting them, saying them out loud, and reading about Hannah. Like I read about Hannah literally every single day. Like I just like, okay, well, you did it for Hannah. Like, I know you're gonna do it for me.
Right.
you know. So those are some things that I did. And of course, praying. I prayed literally all the time, not just for myself, but for other people. Because it just was isolating. And then you meet other women who gave up, who started and like, I'm done, I'm going to travel, I'm going to focus on work, which is a personal thing. Someone reaches their limit, what they feel like they can deal with. And then something about that is sad to me too, because I'm like, Dad, like, what if they would have kept trying? Like, their breakthrough could have been right around the corner, just like mine. My breakthrough was around the corner, even though people had to push me. Like my mom had to push me, you need to go see this pastor. They had to push me to go, do these things. If I hadn't, I don't know. But yeah, those are some of the things that I did.
Yeah, those are all very, very good tips, because I think, we need that when we're in the waiting season. I know I'll
Yeah.
just speak for myself. I definitely need to hear those stories
Yeah.
because when you're deep in waiting, like
Hmm.
you really don't know what to do. And
Yeah.
I had got to the point where I was like, you know what? I don't even want to do it. I told my husband, let's just get a puppy and
Yeah.
I'll be a dog
I
mom,
did that.
like
I
just
had
give me
to.
a little fur baby. I was like, just forget it.
Yeah.
But something happened like maybe a year ago. I just kind
Mhm.
of found it was very small, but it was a
Yeah.
very small piece of faith that was like, you
Yeah.
know what, God, you are too big of a
Hmm.
God not to
Hmm.
answer this prayer.
Exactly.
So if it
Exactly.
hasn't happened yet, I
Yeah.
received the word that it's going to happen. So I'm
Exactly.
going to make room for it to
Yeah.
happen.
Exactly.
So I think really this is kind of, I want to wrap it up with one last thing
Hmm.
for the woman who's still deep in waiting, who feels stuck.
Hmm.
What do you want to say to her right now?
Pray. Get around people who are going to pray with you. Get around people who are going to believe for you, even when you don't believe. Like
Mhm.
other people believe for me. My parents believe for me. They would continuously say it's going to happen. People who I did not know, who I could just be feeling so down. Like I remember one time I flew to New York, went to my parents' church. They had a guest speaker. He called me out. So I'm like, oh gosh, like, cause I didn't want to be called out. And I think I was there for my niece's baptism. And I'm just like, oh God, like, why is he calling me out? So he
Yeah.
calls me out and he calls out. And at that point, I don't think anyone knew. Well, my parents knew. He calls out my situation and it's like, like you've been a good wife. God hears your prayers. You're going to be a mother. God said he's answering your prayers. And like literally, as soon as he said you're going to be a mother, like I just started like crying. Like I had my hands over my face, and I was also embarrassed because a lot of my family was there. Because my niece was getting a Christian that time, and
Mhm.
I'm like, oh man, like I didn't want people to know, other people who I don't see like that, who I would never share this with, and like this man done called out my situation, but he was doing it again. He didn't know me from a can of paint. He was doing it because he was being obedient to what God told him, and also his words. Something else I wrote down, his prophecy. I wrote that down, and I kept that. And I remember one time I got mad. This is a real thing. I got mad, and I looked him up on, I think it was Facebook, and I messaged him because like 2 years had went by from the time he gave me that prophecy, which was I had multiple prophecies I received, and I reached out to him and I said, "Hey, you told me X. I had the date. You gave me this prophecy. You said I'm going to be a mother. I said, just so you know, I haven't had a kid yet. I'm still waiting. Like, like I was mad. Like I said,
Yeah.
I'm still waiting. You told me this." And he reached out to my brother because he knew my brother and was like, your sister reached out to me. And he was like, let her know. Cause I could see that he saw the message, but he didn't respond. He said,
Mhm.
let her know I'm in prayer about it. I don't like when God tells me something, I release the word. He's like, I don't want to lie to her. Like, I don't have a word right now concerning that. But when God gave me the word, I released it to her. And I was like, you said X, Y, and Z. Like, and I was just so
Right.
mad, like typing. But that's part of the frustration of, not being able to conceive and like your emotions being all over the place. And I was mad, like I took it out on him because he gave me this word, but I think I was just mad in general and frustrated. All that to say is like keep a community, keep people who are gonna pray for you, who like even if you lash out, who are gonna be like, okay, it's all right, it's okay, and just have people around you who are gonna believe, even when you feel low in your spirit. You feel like, oh my God, like when is this gonna ever happen for me? Just keep people around you who are gonna believe, who are going to pray for you and who are going to be there for you, even when you conceive and even when you have the child. Because once you have the child, that's a whole nother ball game. It's a lot of work. So you need that community before you conceive, when you conceive, and after you have the child. So just make sure you have a community of people who are praying for you, who believe in God and who believe the things God has said over your life, that they can bring those words into the right now, because that's what you need. You need someone who could pull down that stuff and say, okay, God, you told her X, Y, and Z. It's time to make this happen.
Yeah. I definitely I feel that for sure. I think there's so much power in our words. And I
Mm-hmm.
think the enemy, he tries to keep us quiet because
Yeah.
he knows that if we actually speak a thing, then I
Exactly.
mean that's what the Bible says, it'll be established for us and light will shine on
Exactly.
our ways. So he
Exactly.
wants to keep us quiet so we don't
Mhm.
speak it. But I
Exactly.
think what I'm learning here is that you have to speak it, you know?
Exactly. Exactly. And even once it happens, like when I got pregnant with my daughter, like I said, I was sick the whole pregnancy. When I had her, I was planning to do a natural birth. I don't want any medication, all these things. When I went to labor, I started bleeding. I had all these issues. They didn't know why. They still don't know why. I ended up having to have an emergency C-section because they said, well, she had stopped moving in the womb. But
Mhm.
even through that process, my mom was there. I had people up praying for me. My pastor, who I mentioned from California, um, Prophet Ruckins McKinley, he stayed up. Like they stayed up until I had My daughter. Like, I think I had her like 4 o'clock in the morning. They stayed up and were praying. Like, no, like this kid is coming. This kid's gonna be healthy. And the same when I had my son. Like, I had multiple problems on my pregnancy with my son, bleeding, like the enemy literally was just fighting me. Like, this is not going to happen. Like, they were like, oh, he's going to have this issue, that issue. I said, no, he's not. And on one time I snapped at the doctor because she said something to me. Oh, well, we need to make sure he doesn't have this issue. I said, he doesn't have this issue. I said, he's happy, he's healthy, he's whole. And she looked at me like, well, we have to do our, I'm like, okay, that's fine. I said, but he doesn't have that. Okay. And he had nothing. He was healthy. But throughout that time, throughout those 9 months, like I tell, the enemy fought me. Like, I was bleeding my whole pregnancy with him. I was on bed rest. Like, it was, and so even throughout that whole time pregnant with him, I just kind of like went quiet. Like, I wasn't on social media because I'm like, I'm having this child. Like, nothing's going to stop me from having this child. I would get up every day and I would just proclaim, that he's healthy, that he's fine. And so once you conceive, you have to keep getting up every single day and praying over yourself, praying against anything the enemy tries to throw your way. Because when this child comes into your womb, and especially this child that's anointed, you've gone through so much warfare trying to get this kid here, the enemy will continue to try to fight you. And I went through that with both of my pregnancies. And my kids are here and they are happy, they're healthy, and they're whole. But I went through a lot, even through the pregnancies, trying to get them here. So that's just something just to continue, even once you conceive, continue to pray over yourself and continue to believe that it is well.
Yes, I love that. Thank you so much for that. Like, I honestly feel like this conversation, it has been so incredible. And I definitely appreciate you sharing your journey. I feel like it's
Mhm.
going to help. It's helped me. I mean, even if it doesn't help anyone else, but I definitely know it's going to help so many women,
Mhm.
especially Black women who are going through this journey.
Yeah.
So thank you so much again for this.
Mhm.
Before we wrap it up, I definitely want you to just let us know how we can find you and stay
Mhm.
connected with you.
Mhm. Right now I'm on Instagram. You can follow me at Sonhara Eastman. I've been a little quiet because I got a lot going on with the kids, with life, all the things. But that's where you can find me. I typically post there most of the time when I post stuff. But right now, life is a little hectic with the schedules and the kids and all the stuff. So yeah, but that's where you can find me currently on Instagram.
Okay, that sounds good. And even that's a blessing. Just to see that you're busy, that lets us know that what we're praying for and that what we're working towards is attainable.
Yeah,
So that's
yeah,
definitely inspirational.
yeah. It definitely is, and just believe, even when you don't believe, believe, that it will happen for you.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much again. I just want to leave the viewers with this that no matter what season of waiting you're in, you're not alone. God is still moving, even in the silence. Keep trusting,
Mhm,
keep holding on, and your story is not over.
mhm.
So until next time, everybody stay encouraged and make sure you take care of your soul.